This is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and this video is going to be part of my halftime report on the 2012 Tata Steel Super Tournament that's currently taking place in Vic NZ. So this is a round 6 encounter between our 2012 World Chess Championship challenger Boris Gelfand from Israel, and he's playing with white against the #1 player, I believe, in North America, Hikaru Nakamura. So Nakamura, of note, feels pretty comfortable playing in Tata, in the Tata Steel and Vic NZ, and he won the 2011 version ahead of a pretty strong field as well. So he starts with the Dutch defense. Nakamura is you just never know what to expect from him in the opening, but he has played this Dutch defense, on the Super GM 2700 plus level fairly frequently, and I can't think of many other players that have. So pretty interesting. And Gelfand just opening up G3. This is Nakamura had earlier played the Dutch against Aronian, I believe, in this same tournament. A game he ended up losing, and Gelfand, I think, is following Aronian's footsteps here with his G3 similar defense. So Naka, pretty standard. This is a pretty thematic, typical position in the Dutch, this structure for black. And one of the ideas is that maybe he's trying to gain a tempo on another opening like, let's say, the King's Indian defense with this similar structure, but trying to play directly E5. And black will have saved, 1 or 2 tempos with having played F5 and then developing his knight, so he doesn't have to maneuver his knight to push the pawn to F5. So anyway, so C6, this seems to be the most effective way of playing the Dutch. I think also knight C6 is possible. I think I've seen this, but C6 seems to be the thematic. I don't know. This is what I've seen Nakamura play a good bit. So D5 by Gelfand, and responding, he's got all his pieces developed, his king's tucked away. Now D5, he's trying to make a little space, maybe get the knight to D4, or even from G5, and to put some pressure on this weak E6 square. So Nakamura immediately, no worries, just go ahead and play E5 here. And you gotta be careful as black. You don't want to let white establish a big dominance on that E6 square. So you gotta be playing very actively as black, striving for dynamic complications. Whereas white will typically, against the Dutch, have kind of better long-term prospects. So it's just kind of the normal struggle, the everyday struggle in the Dutch. So now B3, and B3, an interesting idea. I think maybe knight E4 here was a possible continuation by Gelfand. A couple of different ideas. It seems like you could sack the exchange. It seems like you've almost got to after B3, right? I mean, knight to E4, knight takes, let's say bishop takes here. But it seems like, white, maybe he's going to get that back. Or at least he's going to get a pawn. Maybe the knight's, coming to G5 to hit this bishop as well. And it seems to me that, I don't know. I mean, this is pretty sketchy stuff. Say queen E7, queen takes D6. And it seems like white is going to get pretty nice initiative for the pawn. So B3, Gelfand, he's a sharp guy. So don't think, his results haven't been spectacular after he won the 2011 Candidates Tournament. I think it was around April. His results have not been spectacular since then, but he's a very sharp player. So rook E8 by Nakamura, very just makes sense, right? I mean, keep it simple, put the pieces where they belong. Kind of waiting a minute to see where this knight goes, if it goes to A6 or D7. And so Gelfand just, getting this bishop here to combat this dark square diagonal. So knight A6, knight G5. So Gelfand decides, enough of this funny business. He doesn't want to wait for black to play H6 and maybe try to start a pawn storm on the king side. So also, he figures to go ahead and get the 2 bishops. So fair enough, Nakamura just maneuvering still. And that maneuver did cost white some time. This knight G5 maneuver, and I think maybe somewhat premature, it kind of feels, because now, we can see black has got the queen on a very, very good square here. Excellent pressure on the E file. And the bishop on E6, I don't know. I mean, it just, to me, I think white is maybe a little better off holding off on the knight G5 move, because the knight also has a really good home on D4. So why not, what's the big deal? So anyway, knight g5, going after the two bishops, you can't criticize it too much. Although this does centralize black's pieces. So queen c2, knight c5, and rook d8. So you can see here, black, excellently coordinated position, but white doesn't really have anything to complain about either. He's got the two bishops. Everything seems to be going well for white. And so knight e4. So Nakamura he's got to figure out, what's the other plan here for black in this position. Playing d5, it doesn't really seem that great yet. I don't even think it works tactically. So the only other plan that I could see for black would be to play g5. And maybe this is like a little bit committal. Maybe like knight e2 would expose this. This is a weak square on f5, knight e2, and you can just snatch the pawn for white. It's no problem. So maybe g5 is like it's a little too premature. Just throwing the pawns at the opponent's king doesn't always work. So now with knight to e4, okay, no worries. This is just fine. Go ahead and stuff this bishop and gain a little space. So white, makes sense to trade. And here Nakamura just instantly with d5. So reinforcing the pawn here. And maybe, I was thinking during the game, so taking by Gelfand makes sense. Open up a c file and maybe weaken this pawn a little bit. And I was thinking, okay, so queen c5, this just activating the queen. And, you can't criticize that. That's a good move. So now it seems like black, his pieces, like, they look good, but I don't see anything super concrete. And it seems like white is going to swing over and try to penetrate on the c file, which would be pretty good. So these pawns are kind of fixed for the moment. So Nakamura, seeing that they're fixed, he plays knight h5. I thought it was also possible, maybe knight g4, trying to reroute the knight to e5, where it would be hitting these weak light squares on d3 and f3. But maybe if knight here, I don't know. I mean, maybe just a simple response by white. He can just. It's pretty similar to the game, but maybe white can even go for the pin, and this pin maybe it's a little uncomfortable for black. Black's got to play h5. This is just going to weaken the seventh rank even more. So knight g4, okay, interesting, but I think Nakamura's choice, knight h5, was pretty cool too. So instead of trying to get the knight to e5, which maybe was a little unrealistic, as the knight is probably needed to defend the d5 pawn. It's a good amount of pressure coming there. So knight h5 and bishop a3. It's kind of a weird move by Gelfand. I guess if he takes this, there's king takes, and if king takes, maybe just rook here and knight back to f6. And it seems like we have a pretty balanced position. I mean, if knight takes g7, it seems like white's going to be winning a pawn. Not really a good way to defend this for black here. So interesting. Gelfand with bishop a3 was just kind of weird. So Nakamura said, okay, why don't we trade? And this would help black get the rook. The rook comes to f5. Doesn't quite work with this bishop, but I mean the rook is at least on the f file. Maybe f2 will be a focal point. So, moving forward here, just bishop b2, some weird repetition of moves by Gelfand here. It's kind of like making a draw offer. And so Nakamura declines. So with bishop to e5, and looking at the time here, the time control is not going to be reached till move 40, when the players will each get an extra hour. So Gelfand, very low on time, 16 moves to make with only 26 minutes. And Nakamura is a pretty good blitz player, so it's not a good spot to be in. Bishop e5, very well centralized piece. I think better for Gelfand, either take this bishop or bishop to d4 and try to blockade. The rook would be pretty well placed on d4. Try to play on this pressure and not maintaining the tension and pushing this pawn on d5. I think white would be just fine. But bishop to a3, now the bishop is kind of, it is preventing the rook from coming to f8, but other than that, I'm not seeing, it's not controlling a lot of important squares. Whereas the bishop on e5 is preventing the invasion of a white rook on c7, which is very important, controlling the entry points on an open file. So now knight back to f6, consolidating the position in the center. And so rook c2. And I think white's pressure here. He's got the two bishops, but I mean, come on, the bishop on g2 compared to the knight on f6. Bishop on g2 is really pretty passive right now. So also the bishop on a3 compared to the bishop on e5. The bishop on e5 controlling focal entry points and maybe pointing at the king, also, on a really nice diagonal, everything like that. So the minor pieces, this is looking good for black. And I think Gelfand didn't really sense the danger here. And so that's why he played rook to c2. And I think it was much better to, however you can, rook d1, whatever. You got to blockade this d4 square. It should also be noted if rook c6, queen to f5, and the queen is on an even better square. So rook c2, I think Gelfand didn't really sense the danger. Now d4 by Nakamura, getting rid of that weak pawn on d5, before it can be blockaded. And also this is opening up a lot of dynamic complications. So rook c6, queen f5, where the queen kind of wants to go anyway. And so this is very nice by Nakamura, just not scared to trade queens in the middle of the attack because it was necessary, so played without bias towards not trading queens while attacking. So even though Gelfand takes, now bishop to h3, and already here for white, it's getting very difficult to withstand black's attack, because the knight, the bishop all coming in, and also the threat of e3, even f4 is like sometimes a threat for black. I mean, the rooks are perfectly placed. These are very good conditions to attack. So Gelfand, short of time here, we can see he's got 6 minutes. Nakamura's got over a half hour. So e3, pushing forward. And so now, Gelfand is pretty busted here. But, I thought maybe he's going to weasel out. But, the bishop, a3, spectator, and that's, effectively down a piece. Bishop e3, a very nice move by Nakamura. If knight d5, I think white maybe is going to get out of it. At least, it seems like he might. He might be getting out of this with like bishop e6. This would just trade pieces, so I don't know. But instead, Nakamura plays a nice move. Really reminded me of an earlier game of his. I think it was at Reggio Emilia against Anish Giri. Nakamura versus Giri, I think it was in the later rounds, where Nakamura fell victim to a similar bishop maneuver against Giri. I'll be putting a note to that in the article that goes along with this video. And anyway, so bishop e3, similar to what Giri did to Nakamura a couple weeks ago. And just, it looks kind of weird. But as Nakamura plays, you can see it just makes sense. Knight e4, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. You don't really want to trade that knight, but it does, give black an extra tempo as far as getting this rook in. And Nakamura had found the key to the position, was getting the rook, doubling and infiltrating like that on the d file there. So after rook d4, Gelfand resigned because he has nothing. There's no way to prevent this. The bishop is controlling too many squares, and there's really nothing that white can do. If king e2, seems like simply rook d1, and there's, the pawn's just going to queen. There's nothing to do. So a really nice game by Nakamura. He's coming back from an early loss or two at the 2012 Tata Steel, and we'll see how he can perform for the old USA in the second half of this crazy super tournament. This is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and thanks for tuning in.